Welcome back to Federal and Indian Gaming Law. Can everybody hear me? And is this slide showing up? Perfect. Today we're going to cover the Illegal Gambling Business Act, Part 2. But before we do, just kind of a recap. Remember, don't forget to look for those elements when you're looking at different schemes or games or events that could possibly be gambling. And remember those variations. We spent a fair amount of time talking about the Wire Act. It'd be a good idea not to forget the essence of the act, what it means to be in the business of betting or wagering under that act, the pre-2011 DOJ interpretation versus the Fifth Circuit, that Lombardo interpretation, and then the two following interpretations, the 2011, 2018, and the limited exemptions offered under the act. Again, we're talking about the Illegal Gambling Business Act. And in the 1970s, crime was still a significant issue for law enforcement. We saw that training film regarding the FBI. They gave you a pretty idea of what gambling looked like back then, or at least what the FBI thought it looked like back then. And in response to that activity, Congress enacted the Organized Crime Act of 1970 that included the Illegal Gambling Business Act. So again, under the statute, it's whoever conducts, finances, manages, supervises, directs, or owns all or part of an illegal gambling business. And an illegal gambling business is one that operates in violation of any state law in which it's operated. It involves 5 or more people who do any of those things. And it's either been in continuous operation for 30 days or more, or has gross revenue in excess of $2,000 in a single day. So the threshold's fairly low. And we've talked about this before. Gambling includes, pool selling, bookmaking, maintaining slot machines, roulette wheels, dice tables, conducting lotteries, policy, bulletin numbers, games, and selling chances therein. So it covers a lot of ground. And we talked about, what does conducts mean? And we've talked about that in the context of Merrill. Remember what the Merrill court said? What does it mean to conduct?
Isn't it like pretty broad? It's kind of essentially anything that helps support the operation.
Yeah, anything necessary or helpful. And helpful included things like stacking chairs, occasionally serving coffee, sweeping floors, all that helped. Now, Merrill was paid. So he actually was an employee. He did get paid by the gambling operator. But, as we'll see, it might not be the defining characteristic for conducting. So anybody read the following opinion? Well, there's an illegal gambling operation in Mississippi, and the FBI observes 4 people operating the illegal casino in Mississippi. But every time they observe the illegal casino, Miss Fallon is there. And she doesn't operate a gaming table. She wasn't a paid employee. However, occasionally she served drinks, cooked steaks, wiped off kitchen counters, and examined dice. And she would occasionally bet as well. So as these things happen, the gambling house gets raided. Everybody gets arrested. The bettors are let go, and everybody else is convicted. And everybody else are the 4 men and Miss Fallon. And she appeals her conviction. Now, what would be the argument you would use to, if you were her attorney, to appeal her conviction?
She was just a mere bettor.
Yeah, she's a mere bettor. She's not employed. She doesn't make any money off this. I mean, even Merrill made money off this. Merrill was an employee. those, there are other examples or court opinions where the Illegal Gambling Business Act was used to go after stick men at dice tables and lookouts and car park attendants. But all these people were getting paid. And, she's just a bettor. And she doesn't get paid. She'd chip in like everybody else once in a while, but her conduct isn't helpful or necessary, really. She's just a bettor. So what did the court identify as the central issue? We're going to short class today. Oh, for the court on appeal, the central issue is whether the jury could have found under the facts that she was not a mere bettor, but was in fact helpful to the gambling operation. And for that, court believes there was enough there to show that she was helpful, she was conducting, and therefore her conviction stands. Oops, I got ahead of myself. The government did say that, hey, she's there all the time. First of all, she's never missed a day when it was open, and she consistently performed those duties. And the court said, well, there's no bright line that can be drawn between what is necessary or helpful, and such a determination depends on the facts of a given situation and the evidence is presented to the jury. So these are questions of fact, whether you're doing something necessary or helpful. They're not questions of law. And as long as there's some information there, some evidence that you're doing something necessary or helpful, the court's going to let that stand. So again, if you're writing an opinion letter or something akin to an opinion letter, we can opine as to the law. Opining as to the facts, probably not the best idea. So what you end up with fallen is, you don't even have to be an employee. You could be a volunteer. You don't have to make any money off of it. Now, at the district court level, it appears that Ms. Fallen may have been running her own side business to the casino to bring players luck, but that doesn't come up in the appeal. So we get a nice cleaner set of facts for the appeal, and the court just saying, if there's evidence that the person was providing anything necessary or helpful on a consistent basis, jury can infer that that's conducting, and the court's okay with that, even if the person doesn't get paid. So that's a pretty broad net, when even the volunteers can be drawn in. So let's take a look at some of the differences between the Federal Wire Act and Illegal Gambling Business Act. Both require you to be in the business of betting or wagering. They're supply side laws, right? They don't go after the bettors. You can have somebody standing out in front of an illegal casino saying, hey, it's not illegal for you to come and place a wager here under federal law, and that would be true. Illegal for them to offer the casino, run the casino, accept wagers, but that's all supply side, not demand side. So how do these two statutes differ? You kind of saw this in the Scavo opinion, or Barborian, sorry. I should have used Scavo's, but take it back, it was at Scavo. Well, remember under Barborian, which is actually citing Scavo, you just have to be providing something that's integral, or something on a continuous and substantial basis. Right? Where under 1955, the Illegal Gambling Business Act, the standard is different. So under the Federal Wire Act, you don't need 5 people. And that's one of the things Barborian was arguing. And Scavo. You need 5 people. For the Wire Act, you don't. But the conduct is a little bit higher. It's not just anything necessary or helpful. It's providing some kind of continuous or repeat service for a fee, or providing something integral to the business. Where the Illegal Gambling Business Act, it doesn't have to be integral. It can be anything necessary or helpful. So it's, you know, on one hand, it's a lower standard. On another hand, it's a little bit higher. So again, Federal Wire Act, you don't need 5 or more people. Illegal Gambling Business Act, you do. Federal Wire Act, higher standard of what activity needs to be engaged in before you're subject to the law. Illegal Gambling Business Act, a very low standard, but you need to have those 5 people. Does that make sense? They both use the same phrase, in the business of betting or wagering, but it's 2 different standards under 2 different acts. So let's move along to the Truesdale opinion. This one gets cited a lot by those that claim online gambling is legal, even offshore. I'm not sure that that's what this opinion says. So let's go forward. The facts are, anybody read the facts? Alex.
I kind of remember they were like doing, I think it was like sports betting or sports wagering, but it was like in the Caribbean or something, but then there were also like transactions like in the US, I think in like Texas or something, so then they got indicted on a lot of different charges related to like that bookmaking.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So these guys run something called Spectrum or World Sportsbook. Originally, it's operated out of the Dominican Republic. Then it moves to Dallas, or I'm sorry, Jamaica. And these guys are operating out of Dallas. And while they were licensed to take bets in those jurisdictions via phone calls, it wasn't legal in Texas. So you could call an 800 number, you get set up. The Dallas offices would provide information about payoff information and information on how to set up an account. To set up an account, players had to wire money, and these guys were picked up. These guys would pick up the funds and wire them to another bank account offshore. And conversely, when payoffs came through, they would come through their bank account in Dallas, and they would pay off the winners. And these guys promoted these offshore books, and they get convicted of bookmaking. Now, Texas has a bookmaking statute. They also have a promotion of unlawful gambling statute. They've got a lot of gambling statutes, but the statute that they get convicted under is a bookmaking statute. And they appeal their conviction because bookmaking in Texas is defined as receiving, recording, or forwarding more than 5 or more bets in a 24-hour period, or to receive and record or forward bets in excess of $1,000 in a 24-hour period, or a scheme by 3 or more people to receive, record, or forward bets. Now, did they take any bets? These guys in Dallas? They didn't take any bets.
Right, they were they were like just information lines or something.
Yeah, they would provide line information. They would promote the offshore betting. They would facilitate funds transfers, but they never took recorded or forwarded bets. They get convicted under the Illegal Gambling Business Act, with the predicate state offense being the bookmaking offense. So their argument on appeal is that there's insufficient evidence to say that they engaged in bookmaking in Texas because they didn't take any bets. All the bets were taken in Jamaica and the Dominican Republic. They would promote it, but they didn't take it. And the government says, well, yeah, you didn't, but you were conducting financial transactions to support this activity and you were promoting the activity that was illegal. And, all those things are also illegal under Texas law, which they are. What's the court's view of this? Court's view is you convicted these folks under the bookmaking statute, not the funds transfer statute, not the promotion of illegal wagering statute, only the bookmaking statute. Yet you provided no information and no evidence that they were actually engaged in bookmaking. And even though they might be guilty under these other statutes, that's not what they were convicted for. Therefore, the conviction is overturned. Now, if you read the opinion carefully, it doesn't say that online gambling offshore is legal under the Illegal Gambling Business Act, or that the Illegal Gambling Business Act can't be used against offshore gambling. What it does say is that you have to be charged with an offense you actually committed. And the court, like I said, goes out of its way to say that they probably did do these other things that are illegal under Texas law that they could have been convicted for, and that would serve as a predicate state offense for conviction under the Illegal Gambling Business Act. But that's not what they were charged with. That's not what the jury came back with. So for me, the takeaway is that you have to be charged with an offense you actually committed, not a similar offense that you didn't. And on top of that, we have a number of courts that distinguish Truesdale when addressing online gambling. Now, Truesdale gets cited again if you have a client has an interest in an offshore online gambling site. They'll say, oh, well, it means it's legal. It's totally illegal. But read that opinion carefully. And I don't think that's what it says. Listen, if we're totally legal, every casino operator in Nevada would have a offshore sitting in the Caribbean competing for that business. So just isn't. And again, I think ultimately, what it says is you have to be charged with the correct underlying state offense. Oops. Hit the wrong button here.
This is the Financial News Network. I'm Hillary Russo. Here's what's making news at this hour. The founders of the 3 largest online poker sites were indicted by the FBI on Friday in what could serve as a death blow to the thriving industry. 11 executives at Poker Stars, Full Tilt Poker, and Absolute Poker were charged with bank fraud and money laundering in an indictment in a New York court. Prosecutors are seeking to immediately shut down the sites, eventually send the executives to jail, and recover $3 billion from the companies. 2 of the executives were arrested on Friday morning in Utah and Nevada. Federal agents are searching for the others. The online gambling industry has taken off over the last decade, drawing an estimated 15 million Americans to bet online. In 2006, Congress passed a law prohibiting online gambling. Most of the leading sites found ways to work around the law using foreign banks, but prosecutors allege that in doing so, they broke the law. For more on the latest news, keep it here to the Financial News Network. I'm Hillary Russo.
So I should have introduced that a little better. The Illegal Gambling Business Act has been used to go after offshore online gambling interests after Truesdale. And probably the most famous and most widely publicized action was in 2011, when the federal government went after the three largest poker sites at the time: Full Tilt, Absolute, and the biggest of them all, PokerStars. And what they used was not the Federal Wire Act. What they used was the Illegal Gambling Business Act. And what they charged them with was violating the laws of New York and Washington State as the predicate offenses. They also charged them with bank fraud, wire fraud, a bunch of other things. But it was the Illegal Gambling Business Act that was the centerpiece of the indictments. Let's take another look at another video from that time period.
This is the final.
Oops. I guess it was the same video, sorry. So we do have the poker indictments that do come down.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry with millions of participants, and on Friday, it was shut down by federal agents. The FBI seized the domain names of PokerStars, Full Tilt Poker, and Absolute Poker, and prosecutors charged 11 people with fraud, money laundering, and illegal gambling. James Kilsby is the America's editor for gambling compliance, a specialist
James, good guy.
for regulatory issues in the gaming industry. He's with us from Washington this morning. James, I cannot imagine a bigger deal to come along and strike your industry. Tell me, does this end online poker as we know it?
I think it's certainly fair to say that it does in the US, at least for the time being. There's been some debate for a couple of years really about whether US laws as they stand prohibit poker. People have said that it's a skill game and not a form of gambling like sports betting. It's pretty clear from this that the Justice Department thinks it's illegal as things stand now. So certainly in the US, this is definitely a game changer. There's no doubt about it.
So as you point out, this industry has been in focus for quite some time. They passed a law in 2006 that effectively tried to ban it, but now they've gone ahead and seized the domain names. Is it fair to say that the online poker industry really didn't see that tactic coming?
I think that's a fair statement. I mean, this is the first time that, at least I'm aware of, that the federal authorities have used that tactic and seized the domain names. And that meant, for example, over the weekend, that if you're an international player with these sites in the UK or Australia, you couldn't access the site through that .com domain. And that's obviously of huge significance, not just for the industry in the US, but globally.
Now, with charges of bank fraud and money laundering, it's clear that the focus of the prosecutor's case is on payments. Is that ultimately the Achilles heel of this industry? Because it seems to be what the 2006 law focused on in the first place.
That's right. I think that the enforcement of online gambling, countries in Europe that have looked at this as well, and often looked at it in conjunction with actual licensing and protecting a licensed market, looking at the payment mechanism and blocking that. Another thing that's been considered is blocking ISPs, blocking web addresses. That's not something that the US has discussed seriously. And the other thing being banning the advertising. But I mean, these poker companies were able to advertise in the US by advertising free play sites through .NET web addresses that didn't take money, and they were doing that legitimately.
James, I just want to ask you before we run, because we only have about 20-30 seconds, who are the winners? Are there going to be any winners out of this? Does more traffic go to the casinos? Does it go to British gambling sites, for example?
We've said that, as your segment said before, bwin.party on the London Stock Exchange appeared to be a winner this morning. There's probably, I think the focus of that would be in Europe and the competition there. But I think the question really that remains to be seen is how this impacts debate over possible regulation in the US. If this leads to regulation as a result of the need to protect consumers, there could be winners among US casino companies moving to the space. If not, and if it poisons the issue, then the online gambling sector as a whole really is going to suffer as a result of this.
Well, much yet to be decided, and the question remains whether this is a strategy to buy time before the federal government or the states create their own legislation to regulate this industry. James, thanks very much for joining us. James Kilsby is the America's editor for Gambling Compliance. He was with us from Washington. We continue to follow this amazing story, the crackdown on online poker.
So, I mean, James is right. At the time, there was a bill in Congress to exempt poker from the Federal Wire Act and the Illegal Gambling Business Act if it was regulated by the state, particularly online poker. And the state regulations met certain requirements. Now, that bill ended up dying, so never came to be. But in 2011, this was kind of earth-shattering, and it got headlines. And if you read the indictment materials, it reads kind of like a soap opera. It's pretty good reading. But if you look at the actual indictments, what you have are conspiracy to violate the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, and we'll talk about that in a future class. But as you move down, it's operation number 5, their operation of an illegal gambling business, PokerStars, against the key people at PokerStars. Isai Scheinberg, Nelson Burtnick, Paul Tate, Ryan Lang, all the way down, Chad Ely, John Campos. Now, some of these people are involved in funds transfers for PokerStars. Same thing for Full Tilt, and the same thing for Absolute Poker. And it really was an interesting time. It's a powerful act, and it had a powerful impact on online poker. We'll take a look at one more video just to give you a flavor for what it was like at that point in time, since it was, oh my God, 11 years ago.
How much money did you make playing poker online?
About 300,000.
In how long?
3 or 4 years.
In the online poker world, Sean Bussey was known as Jordan Kicks.
On April 15th, I was playing poker like any other day, and all of a sudden we just couldn't play anymore when it was frozen.
It became known as Black Friday, when the Justice Department seized Full Tilt Poker's operations and froze player accounts, alleging the company was operating a global Ponzi scheme.
I think this is uncharted territory. For the first time, player monies have been seized.
The DOJ says Full Tilt owed some $390 million to players around the world, including roughly $150 million to U.S. players, but had only $60 million in its coffers. And it alleges members of the company board and other owners were paid more than $440 million over a 4-year period. Full Tilt fired back, saying it's in no way a Ponzi scheme and says it's committed to paying players back. Out 60 grand though, Sean Bussey's not convinced.
A lot of people feel betrayed, I guess, that this was, the site where they made their income. They had the relationship with the people there. They trusted them, and they basically sold them us.
Just this week, French investment firm group Renard Tapie reached an agreement with the Department of Justice to acquire Full Tilt Poker and says it will reimburse players outside the U.S. But for American players like Sean, they'll have to apply to the DOJ to get their money back. Full Tilt's current owners have not yet accepted the deal.
I try not to get my hopes up. I consider that money lost, and if I get it back, then it will be a nice bonus.
I think that the general feeling is, okay, well, people can't play the games that they like online anymore. But for you, it was a lot more than that. This was your livelihood.
This was my job, yeah. I feel like my job has been taken away from me right now. This is my source of income for the past 4 years.
And Sean is not alone. According to H2 Gambling Capital, about 8% of U.S. online poker players, or about 35,000 people in this country, made a living off the game. Now, many of them have moved abroad, where online poker is alive and well. What did you use your winnings for?
Everything. My car, rent, tuition now, all my bills, computer, everything I use. Everything I own pretty much that I bought in the past few years has been through poker winnings. This was my office, basically. I would sit here, I bought a nice desk.
What was your best day ever?
Playing online in 2009. I got second place for $163,000. I'm not sure.
Ethan Ruby says he used his Full Tilt winnings to start college funds for his kids and to buy a hot tub. He doesn't think he'll ever see the $13,000 he had in his account when it was frozen. Brian Mogilewski turned to online poker after losing his job in the mortgage industry. He's now out 28 grand.
Poker's been an American pastime for however many years.
An American pastime?
Sure. Everyone loves to play poker.
And some are even gambling with their losses, offering to sell their Full Tilt account balances for a discount to willing buyers who think the money will come through eventually. In New York, Poppy Harlow, CNN Money.
So this was big business back in 2011. It's still pretty big business. In the wake of the indictments, several new poker operators came in to fill the void, or online poker operators. But poker kind of goes in waves. You know, there's waves of popularity, waves where it's not so popular. And right now it's just not that popular. But there are 3 new operators or subsequently operators that have filled that space and have taken measures to try and insulate themselves from the Department of Justice, not by operating legally, but by making it more difficult to get caught. So it still goes on. The Illegal Gambling Business Act is a powerful act.